The rear tires lose grip for just a split second on a damp European road. That is all it takes. The heavy engine hanging way out back decides it no longer wants to follow the front of the car. The back end swings out violently, a sudden, uncontrollable pirouette. The driver, a wealthy businessman who just bought this engineering marvel, is no longer in control. He is just a passenger in a $200,000 metal coffin that is trying to swap ends. This was not a rare occurrence. It was Tuesday for owners of the original Porsche 911 Turbo, and it earned a nickname that Porsche's marketing department would probably rather you forget: the Widowmaker. This was the brutal reality that stood in stark contrast to the glossy brochures. Porsche sold a dream of unparalleled performance and Teutonic superiority. What they delivered was a death trap with a fancy badge, a car that demanded the skills of a factory race driver, but was sold to dentists and lawyers. The scandal was not a single event you could point to, like a faulty airbag. It was a slow-burning, calculated decision to build and sell a car that they knew, from the very beginning, could and would kill the unprepared. This is the story of how one of the most iconic sports cars ever built became a legend for all the wrong reasons. To understand why the 911 Turbo was so vicious, you have to start with the fundamental physics problem that Porsche engineers decided to turbocharge, literally. The engine is in the worst possible place for stability, hanging out behind the rear axle. Think of it like trying to push a shopping cart from the back instead of the front. It wants to fishtail. Now put 500 pounds of metal where the groceries go. That is the basic 911. For the Turbo, they added a massive turbocharger and all the plumbing, making the rear end even heavier. So you have this massive pendulum of weight just waiting for an excuse to swing. Then you add the turbo lag. And this wasn't the barely noticeable lag of a modern twin-scroll turbo. This was the nothing, boom kind of lag. You'd put your foot down, and for what felt like an eternity, nothing would happen. The car would just coast. You'd think, okay, maybe I need more throttle, so you'd push the pedal further. And then, just as you were about to lift off, the turbo would spool, boost would hit, and the entire rear of the car would be flooded with a tidal wave of torque. If you were even slightly off-center, if the wheels were turned a fraction of a degree, that sudden shove from behind would break the tires loose. And because all the weight was in the back, there was no weight on the front tires to help you steer out of it. You were just along for the ride. And what safety nets did you have to catch you? Absolutely nothing. No anti-lock brakes, no traction control, no stability management. The only driver aid was the brown stain you might leave on the seat if you were lucky enough to survive. Porsche's entire philosophy was built on their racing pedigree. They built cars for drivers. The problem is, they forgot that 99% of their customers weren't driving on the Nürburgring on a sunny day. They were driving home from the country club on a rainy night. The car's overconfidence was baked in. It was a perfect storm of technology that, frankly, seemed to hate its owner. It was a recipe where every single ingredient was chosen specifically to create disaster. So how do you sell a machine this demanding to the public, with some of the most gloriously dishonest marketing of the era? Porsche's advertisements did not feature sweaty-palmed drivers wrestling with snap oversteer. Oh no! They showed the 911 Turbo effortlessly powering through sweeping corners, a symbol of ultimate exclusivity. The message was clear. This car is for winners, for the successful man who has arrived. The target buyer was not a seasoned racer. It was a wealthy professional who wanted the ultimate status symbol. The kind of guy who thought his ability to afford the car was the same as the ability to drive it. The brochures were masterpieces of omission. They would talk about the revolutionary turbo technology, the incredible power output, the racing heritage. What they did not mention was the vicious liftoff oversteer. They did not have a diagram explaining that if you panicked in a corner and simply lifted your foot off the gas, the sudden weight transfer forward would lighten the rear end even more and guarantee a spin. They certainly did not include a disclaimer warning that this vehicle requires the reflexes of a fighter pilot and may attempt to murder you in the rain. Dealerships were in on it too. Test drives were carefully managed. Salesmen would downplay the car's notorious behavior, chalking up stories of crashes to idiot drivers who didn't respect the power. The narrative was always the same. The car is perfect, the driver is flawed. So you would have dentists, lawyers, and executives signing on the dotted line, convinced they were buying a refined German sports car. What they were actually buying was a barely tamed race car that had zero tolerance for error. The 911 Turbo became the ultimate symbol of more money than sense, a status symbol that could literally kill you if you didn't know its dark little secrets. It was a mirage, and a lot of people crashed trying to reach it. So what happens when you sell a race car with a hair trigger to people who think a spirited drive means speeding up a freeway on-ramp? You get a body count. And we're not just talking about crumpled fenders. Insurance companies in the 1970s and the 1980s saw a massive spike in claims specifically tied to the 911 Turbo. It wasn't just that they were expensive to fix, it was that they were crashing in ways other cars simply did not. They were not just hitting trees head-on. They were found backwards in ditches wrapped around poles sideways, performing unintentional pirouettes across multiple lanes of traffic. The scenarios were always the same: a wet road, a mildly challenging corner, and a driver who made the one mistake the Turbo would not forgive: lifting off the throttle. This phenomenon is called lift-off oversteer, and it is the Widowmaker's signature move. You are cornering, you feel the back end get a little light, and your primal instinct is to slow down. So you lift your foot off the gas. Bad move. That sudden reduction in power unloads the rear wheels even more, and the heavy engine says, "Okay, my turn," and swings the car around like a wrecking ball. In the dry, a skilled driver might catch it. In the rain, it was a death sentence. The car would swap ends faster than you could say, "Scheisse." And here is the real scandal. Porsche knew. They had reams of internal data from testing. Their own engineers were well aware of the car's vicious handling characteristics. But the public response was a masterclass in corporate blame shifting. The official line was always some variation of "the car is fine, the driver needs more training." It was the automotive equivalent of "you are holding it wrong." They created a machine that punished the most basic human panic response, and then had the audacity to act surprised when people panicked. The nickname Widowmaker was not dreamed up by journalists. It was earned in the most literal way possible, in driveways and on roads where the only warning was the sudden, silent swing of that whale tail in the rearview mirror before everything went sideways. So the big question is, was this all just an unfortunate accident of physics? Or did Porsche know they were selling a certified Widowmaker? Let's be honest, this is Germany. They do not accidentally engineer anything. The truth is, they knew everything. Internal memos and testimonials from engineers who worked on the project later confirmed they were fully aware of the car's vicious handling characteristics from the earliest test drives. The problem was not a lack of knowledge. It was a conflict of priorities. On one hand, the engineering team wanted to build the most capable, race-winning machine possible. On the other hand, there was the reality of making it street legal for people whose only racing experience was trying to beat a yellow light. The testing grounds were a brutal reveal. Professional drivers, the guys who could handle a car sliding at 150 miles per hour, would come back from shaking down the Turbo prototype with wide eyes. They would report the snap oversteer, the terrifying liftoff characteristics, the way the car would bite with zero warning. But here is the corporate calculus. Those same drivers could also set blistering lap times. The car's very flaws were what made it so dominant on the track in the right hands. Porsche faced a choice: neuter the car's performance to make it safe for the average buyer, or embrace its dangerous character as part of its racing pedigree. They chose the legend over the liability. And the racing success became the perfect smokescreen. Every time a 911 Turbo dominated a motorsport event, the marketing department had a field day. They could point to the podium and say, "See, this is the technology you were getting?" They conveniently left out the part about needing a full roll cage and a professional co-driver to make it work. It was a brilliant, cynical strategy. They used the car's ultimate capability as proof of its perfection, while quietly accepting that its unforgiving nature was just the cost of doing business. It was a calculated risk, and the calculation basically said that the prestige and profit from selling this Halo car were worth the occasional incident. They knew the car could kill you, but they also knew you would pay a fortune for the privilege. Facing mounting criticism and, all the crashes, Porsche could not just ignore the problem, but they also could not admit their glorious turbo was fundamentally flawed. So they did what any proud German company would do. They applied a technical solution that kind of helped, while completely ignoring the root cause. Their answer was aerodynamics, specifically the most iconic part of the car, the massive rear whale tail. The idea was simple. That big wing would push the rear of the car down at speed, increasing downforce and theoretically planting those rear tires more firmly. It worked, but with a catch. The downforce only really kicked in at higher speeds. Now you had a car that was more stable when you were already going fast enough to lose your license, but it was just as deadly at the lower speeds where most people actually drove. Even worse, that whale tail was not made of feathers. It was a hefty piece of fiberglass or rubber that added more weight to the very back of the car, slightly exacerbating the pendulum effect they were trying to solve. It was like putting a small bandage on a gaping wound and then taping a brick to the bandage. Then came the wider tires. Porsche put on increasingly fatter rubber at the back to increase the contact patch. More grip, right? Sounds good. But this was perhaps the most insidious fix of all. The wider tires gave drivers a false sense of security. The car felt more planted. It could handle more throttle coming out of a corner. But it did not change the fundamental physics. All it did was raise the limit at which the car would snap. So instead of biting you at 6/10 of the car's capability, it would now wait until you were at 9/10. The problem was, when it finally did let go at that higher limit, it happened even faster and more violently. There was no gradual slide, no warning. It was just grip, grip, grip. And then you were facing the wrong way. They did not engineer away the snap. They just made it slightly more predictable for experts and even more deadly for everyone else. The fundamental flaw, a heavy engine hanging off the back of the car, was something they simply refused to address. The Widowmaker was going to collect one way or another. After years of watching their prized flagship try to murder its customers, Porsche finally started to cave to technology. It wasn't a quick change of heart. It was a slow, reluctant drag into the modern era, kicking and screaming. The first tiny step was the introduction of ABS, anti-lock brakes, in the 1980s. This was a huge deal. It meant that when you panicked and stomped on the brake pedal, the car wouldn't just lock up its tires and slide helplessly into whatever you were trying to avoid. It was the first electronic aid that acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, the driver might need a little help sometimes. The real game changer, the moment the Widowmaker was finally tamed, did not come until the 996 Turbo. That's when Porsche introduced all-wheel drive. This was the engineering solution that actually addressed the root problem. By sending power to the front wheels, they finally gave the car some pulling force up front to counteract the pushing force from the heavy rear engine. It transformed the car from a tail-happy monster into a point-and-shoot weapon. The all-wheel drive system acted like a safety net, catching the car before the tail could fully step out. It was like putting training wheels on a grizzly bear. Suddenly, it was manageable. The final piece of the puzzle was the one Porsche resisted the most: electronic stability control. For years, their philosophy was that a true driver's car should not have a computer second-guessing your inputs. By the late 90s, the technology had become too good to ignore. Stability control was the ultimate nanny. It could sense the car starting to rotate and would individually brake wheels to keep it in line. It was the final admission that the average buyer could not handle the raw turbo. The irony is almost too perfect. The car that was once the ultimate test of driver skill had become the ultimate point-and-shoot supercar killer, accessible to anyone with a fat wallet. You no longer needed the skills of a race driver. You just needed to keep the car pointed in the right direction and stand on the gas. The beast had been domesticated, and in the process, Porsche created their own toughest competitor, a turbo that did not want to kill you. So if these old turbos were such widow-making death traps, why do people still obsess over them? Why does a car that tried to kill its owners command such insane prices on the collector market? It is the perverse appeal of raw, unfiltered danger. Driving a modern turbo is like playing a racing game with all the assists turned on. Driving an original Whaletail is like juggling chainsaws. It demands 100% of your attention all the time. There is no computer to save you. It is just you, a noisy engine, and the very real possibility of swapping ends if you get lazy. For a certain type of person, that is the whole point. Modern collectors and drivers are not seeking comfort. They are seeking an experience you cannot get anymore. They want a car that demands respect and punishes mistakes. Mastering a Widowmaker is a badge of honor. It is the automotive equivalent of free climbing a mountain. The risk is the entire reward. And Porsche, in a brilliant pivot, has fully embraced this dark chapter as part of its heritage. The Widowmaker nickname is no longer a secret shame, it is a selling point. It is proof that you are not just buying a car, you are buying a piece of history with teeth. The scandal that nearly broke them ultimately cemented the turbo's legendary, untamable status. It is the high-stakes driving experience that regulations and lawyers have all but eliminated, and that is exactly why it is so coveted. You would think the whole nearly killing your customer base thing would be a cautionary tale for other manufacturers. Yeah, not so much. The same ego-driven cycle repeats itself every decade. You see it with other rear-engine cars that push the limits, and you see it with mid-engine hypercars that deliver 1,000 horsepower to drivers who think a track day is something you buy at a resort. There is always this tension between chasing ultimate performance on a spreadsheet and making a car that is actually drivable by a human being with a normal set of reflexes. We are still fascinated by machines that can humble us. There is a primal appeal to a car that feels alive, that has a mind of its own, that reminds you that you are not fully in control. The Porsche Turbo was the original "this might kill me but I want it" car. That desire has not gone away, it has just been sanitized by technology. Modern supercars have all the electronic nannies to keep you safe, but the underlying thrill is the same, flirting with a level of performance that is fundamentally beyond most people's abilities. The lesson that never gets learned is that when you build something this extreme, you are not just selling a car, you are selling a responsibility that many buyers are not equipped to handle. In the end, the scandal left a permanent mark on Porsche's DNA. It solidified their reputation for building demanding, driver-focused cars, for better and for worse. More importantly, The turbo's dangerous legacy fundamentally shaped how all sports cars were developed from that point forward. It was the brutal, real-world test case that proved performance without predictability is just a liability lawsuit waiting to happen. The ultimate irony is that Porsche's greatest competition was not Ferrari or Lamborghini. It was their own past. Their biggest challenge became figuring out how to keep the turbo's wild soul intact while building a car that would not actively try to murder its driver. They created their own toughest competitor, and in doing so, they changed the game for everyone. Make sure to subscribe so you can vote on what automotive scandal we should expose next.